Welcome. I'm Dr. Lumbreras from Charleston State University. This is my colleague.
I'm Dr. Deborah, also from Charleston State University.
And what we're going to do today, what we'd like to do today is we want to talk to you about a call rubric, a computer-assisted language learning rubric. The last 9 years of my teaching career, I was in the Rio Grande Valley, Texas, specifically La Jolla ISD. And working, so I'll just give you sort of a quick snapshot. My particular campus, my district, anywhere from 24 to 25,000 students. 99.9% were Hispanic, 60 to 67, 70% ESL learners. And so with that kind of demographic, we were always looking for innovations, ways to make the curriculum accessible for the students. One of the things that I found incredibly frustrating was that that old notion, let's throw it at the wall and see what sticks. And so there was always these, let's try this, let's try that. Here's this new program. Here's this new web-based idea that we can use. And I found it incredibly frustrating because you wanted me to work it into the curriculum. As classroom teachers, there's already too much to do in the curriculum, and now you want me to add something else, not really knowing if it's pedagogically based or if it's applicable to making the curriculum and making the language accessible for the students. And so as I worked on a second language acquisition certificate so that I could teach, be in compliance and teach these ESL courses at the post-secondary level, I was given an assignment. And the assignment for my second language, for my call class, was to create a rubric based on something. And so I drew on that experience as a classroom teacher. I always think, despite being at the post-secondary level, I very much have a teacher mentality, and I work with pre-service teachers. So and my wife is an educator. So there's always these constant reminders of what it's like to be a novice learner. And I think that's something that we all tend to, the longer that we're in education, sometimes when we step out of the classroom, we tend to forget what that's like. And so with that sort of mentality and that framework, I went after this rubric. And when I turned it in, my professor said to me, you really need to think about doing something with this. And so I turned to Dr. Banker, who actually hired me in post-secondary education. I'm eternally grateful for that. She looked at me and said, "You're my guy." And I was like, okay, and here I am, And so Dr. Banker and I took the original rubric and we took it through an entire sort of revision process where we brought in a lot of different things. And those are the things that I want to share with you today, this morning, and then give you an opportunity to sort of work with the rubric and just sort of, we see how it goes. Okay. So a few things before we get started. What does the research say about the need to evaluate online learning tools? And the one that for me, that is incredibly important that I want to talk about is Rogerson and Ravel. And this one here, it says, they suggest that the increasing attractiveness and availability of call tools, computer-assisted language learning tools, is more technology driven as opposed to being pedagogy led. Therefore, it lacks the pedagogical tools to ensure effective language acquisition. We often sort of jump into, there's this notion, and I think of if you have an education background and if you've been a classroom teacher, we tend to jump into the activity before we ever really, if you look at a TEK, and we call them TEKs in Texas Essential Knowledge and Skill. That's my being a little, I gotta open my mind a little bit here. If you're looking at an SLO, a student learning outcome, right? This one is about planets. And so you jump into, I'm reminded of an experience that I had as a 5th grade teacher when I first got to Texas, and the TEK asked to discuss the order of planets in the solar system. And so I taught my students the order of the planets in the solar system. There's a great Bill Nye video on the planet. So I brought it, well, this is back, 20 years ago. So it was a great Bill Nye video that was on, and we had this new thing, with the internet. And then because we were in Texas, we had gotten this grant from Dell Computers where we had this really neat thing called PowerPoint, and we built presentations. And so we did all these really great things, and the kids did fantastic, and they knew the planets and they knew all the characteristics. But when they got assessed, Discuss the order of the planets in the solar system. Well, why are the planets in the order in the solar system that they are? Anybody take a guess real quick? Fifth grade science? Starts with the G. Gravity. And I never talked about gravity. And the questions that they were asked were about mass and about gravity and about distance from, right? And so that mentality, when I read this, as I was going through the research and I read this, that mentality is that we never really stop to think, right? What are we doing with this particular tool? What is its purpose? Instead, we're just jumping into, and as a teacher, working in the Rio Grande Valley, and we had so many federal dollars, so much federal money was coming into the district because of the students that we were working with. So we were always like, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to, but we never stopped to ask the question, right? Is it pedagogically led? And so this rubric hopefully allows us to stop, take a beat, and look at what we're using and asking, is it really benefiting the student? Is it truly helping with language acquisition? Something else that we'll talk about, but I will just bring up. In Texas, we tend to focus on the 4 language acquisition domains. So listening, speaking, reading, and writing. But because we have moved into the internet age, I guess is this whole, I call, Dr. Banker and I did a little bit of work on this. And there is a concept now. So I don't know if you're familiar, but there were digital, so my parents were born in the 1940s. So my parents would be digital, what they call digital immigrants, who sort of migrated into technology, right? Myself, we are the digital natives. I was born in 1973. So, AOL online. I remember spending $100 on a 56K modem. Yeah. The one in my house now was 1,000, right? AT&T. And then you have my children. And I'm sorry, I didn't see his name. You're fair. Eric? So Eric and I were talking just a few minutes ago, and my children, I have teenagers. I have a 15-year-old, a 13-year-old, and an 11-year-old. They live in a digital utopia. Their whole world exists online. They don't know a world that does not, how they play, communicate, relationships, everything occurs online. And so what has happened is that we've moved beyond just listening, speaking, reading, and writing to include these 2 new domains, viewing, because so much of what we do is online, and then representing to learn, which if you think about just Google Classroom, right? And so these 2 new things have come along. And so we need to also talk about these as well. And we've worked these into the rubric because this digital utopia exists. Okay. So we can let's talk about the descriptors. And when we go through the descriptors, and I'm really sorry, let me stop. Is there anything you would like to add before I go forward?
You're doing great.
Okay. I just want to, I'll get carried away and go. So we're going to look at the different descriptors of the rubric, and all I'm going to show you now, we'll give you a copy. Actually, do you want to hand it out to them now? Dr. Banker will give you a copy of the rubric so that you can look at. I'm going to show you what the exemplary, we'll discuss what the exemplary part is, but you can see how we've done the scoring system and sort of take a look at how we move our way down the rubric, what's there and what's not there. So the first thing that we want to look at when we're looking at any of these online language learning tools is we want to look at the source. And what was really important to Dr. Banker and I, as we worked our way through the rubric and we sort of reconstructed these descriptors, is the tool prepared and maintained by an accredited, verifiable, and contactable source? Is it usable, accessible, and is it findable? Can you get to it easily, or do you have to do a whole bunch of clicks? Is it user-friendly? Who actually created it? Is it an institution of language, or is it, Joe Smith, who just kind of put something together? Is it interactive for the students? Those kinds of things. And if you're going to use anything in the classroom, and I think anybody who is working in education or has worked in education, we don't have time to waste on tools or ideas that just are not pedagogically based, research based. They need to be able to target what it is that we're trying to teach the kids. We don't have enough time to just waste where they can go and go play. We don't want what they're doing online to be. Dr. Banker and I wrote a manuscript for this as well. And I think the line that we used was, we don't want a glorified online babysitter. That's not what we're after. We need this to target something. These kids are already sort of behind the 8 ball. And Dr. Banker and I both have extensive experience working with students in the classrooms who are NCRI, newcomers and recent immigrants, and we don't have time. Okay, so the first one is the source, and then we want to talk about content. And from the exemplary standpoint, does the tool allow students to practice the targeted grade level math, reading, science, and social studies objective? And for us, it was important to ask about grade level. When we think about, so our experience in Texas, we have beginners, the way that we categorize our students who are, we use the term emergent bilinguals now. We're slowly moving away from ELL because the research says that that's got sort of a negative connotation, but emergent bilinguals puts a positive spin on it. And I agree. But there's a difference between a 3rd grade beginner or a 2nd grade beginner and because the way that we categorize them in Texas is our beginners, intermediates, advanced, and advanced high. And there is a difference between a 2nd grade beginner and a 7th grade beginner, or a 2nd grade intermediate and a 7th grade. And so the ability for whatever tool that we're using, does it allow us to do these targeted things? And then can we get into the content areas? Another sort of part of when you work with these emergent bilingual students, these ELL learners, we have to talk about BICS and we have to talk about CALP, right? The basic intercommunicative stuff that they're doing, and then the cognitive academic language. We need, both of them need to work, but if we're talking about cognitive language development, cognitive academic language development, then we need to be able to target these particular areas. And we need to be able to go into like their grade level and do it. Because it's not going to do them any good to practice something that is reading teachers, zone of proximal development. If we take them out of their ZPD, it's not going to do that. If it's too hard or it's not hard enough, it just doesn't do us any good. Huh? Accuracy. Does the tool allow users to practice sentence structure, vocabulary, and grammar within the chosen content area? This was really important to us because this speaks directly to the CALP. That, you know, of course, when you get them in the classroom, you will do the heterogeneous grouping, you will do the ability grouping. You want, in Texas, we want to take a beginner, we want to put them with an advanced student, someone who may be truly bilingual, so that they can sort of bridge that. Because as a teacher, you've got 20, 25 kids. I work particularly with secondary students. You've got 7 sections. You're looking at 140, 150 students. My wife is a 9th grade teacher at our high school at home. She has 163 students over 7 courses, and she has 26 who are or 26 who are special ed, and she has 31 who are ESL learners. And so this idea that we have to be able, whatever they're doing, they have to be able to practice some things on their own and specifically target, especially that academic language. Because she's just got too many kids and trying to create, you know, so she does the heterogeneous grouping. And yes, we use the, you know, she uses the ability centers, and she's kind of got them walking around where she can do the active monitoring, those kinds of things. Much the same stuff that we were doing, you know, both of us came from the same district in the Valley, and both were sort of trained in the same way. But if you can't target the vocabulary and the grammar to help them with the CALP, then the tool really isn't, then whatever it is that you're using isn't necessarily helping them build the skills that they need to acquire the content. And that's the key. When they're in the classroom, we want to make the content comprehensible. They have to learn. And success breeds success. I think all of us understand that. If you feel comfortable and confident in this area, then that's going to translate to something else, right? That's sort of our goal. And as a teacher, I know Dr. Banker shares the same sort of mentality. As I work with my pre-service teachers, and I have I'll call it a blessing. but my students come from all over. So I have the agricultural students, the Kines students, the Colfa students, the music students. They're secondary students, so they want to specialize in something. But I always let them know that success in your area translates to success in other areas. And I think that that's part of, as we were looking at the tool and developing the tool, that was sort of one of the underlying sort of foundational conversations that we had, thinking about, especially accuracy. Comprehensibility and pronunciation. Does the tool allow users to understand all the contextual cues, respond to those content-specific cues, and practice responding appropriately? I don't know if you've ever worked with like language learners, new language learners. Our colorful colloquialisms here, our idioms, it's just, they have a hard time sort of, and I will give you an example of what I'm talking about. So I told you I was born in 1973. The 80s, 90s were sort of my formative teenager, and there was a phrase, it was the emergence of the hip hop era. We could do a whole string on that if you wanted. But there was a phrase, right? I ain't mad at you. In that phrase, I am just like, you're cool, we're cool, it's good, right? And so working with my students, and I was like, one of the kids, and he had misbehaved. I think the Indians walking out. He was like, and he said to me, "We love Mr. Burks. I'm sorry." I was like, "I ain't mad at you." He was like, "Well, I didn't think you would be." Right? Not sort of understanding that colloquialism, that sort of little thing, right? They don't understand those things. And so when we talk about responding to those content-specific cues and practice responding appropriately, it's the intonation, it's the pronunciation, it's the situation, and it's the tool giving them the opportunity, especially with the contextual cues, is it giving them the opportunity to respond, and then to respond what we would consider appropriately. Here in sort of our culture, our language, it's completely different if you're from Texas. Texas is an entire, when I was growing up, there was an ad campaign that said Texas, it's like a whole nother country, and it really is. I took my wife, who is a Texas born and bred woman. I took her to Michigan. I was born and raised in Michigan. I took her to Michigan and with my family, she ordered tea. They brought her tea, but it was hot. And she was like, "What is this?" I was like, "We asked for tea." I was like, "This is not Texas. They don't, But this sort of, even that, right? All of that, when I came to Texas, in Michigan, it's pop. In Texas, it's soda, right? So all of these little things, but giving our students the opportunity to practice these things. Feedback. Is the user provided specific content area and language domain feedback? Is it giving them feedback? I think as teachers, all of us understand too, that if you're going to assign something to a student for them to do, then you need to give them feedback, particularly if it's in those language domains of reading and speaking. If you're giving them those two things, writing as well. If you've got them doing things and you've got them producing artifacts for you, artifacts that you accept as or deem that are genuine reflections of what you will accept as success for demonstrating success on this particular content, then we need to give them, specific feedback so that they can learn and grow. If they're using a tool, the tool needs to give them specific feedback as well. So I've been talking for a little bit. Do we have any questions? Anything so far? Anything that I can answer for you? Are we good?
There's one online.
There is a question online. Okay.
Let me get it. Is there a recommended grouping for student groups? I hear affinity, heterogeneous. What are the others? If anyone has a link to reputable sources for recommended groupings.
So I don't have a link to recommended grouping, but the way that I would answer, should I answer it on that? Or no, you're good. Okay. So thank you for the question. I'm sorry. First of all, I don't have a link in terms of like recommended grouping. As a teacher, my sort of perspective, my training is ability grouping. But ability grouping is predicated on you knowing what your students are able to do. I will say this, especially as it relates to English language learners, these emergent bilinguals, that we need to set aside sort of our preconceptions, our misconceptions. We need to set aside our religious affiliations, political affiliations. All of that stuff needs to be set aside, and we just accept the kids where they are and who they are as they come into the classroom. But for me, when I think about the ability grouping, it's knowing what they can and cannot do, which is why in Texas, we use beginners, intermediate, advanced, and advanced high, but you have to know that as a teacher. And the only way that you get to know that as a teacher is that if you build a relationship and you're intimately, I don't know if intimately is the right word, but if you have intimate knowledge of their pedagogical skills, like what can they do? Where are they at? And then taking that kid. So the way that when I illustrate this to the students that I work with, I tell them, take the introvert, right? And put them with the extrovert. Take the one who is not easily distracted and put them with the one who does the distracting, right? You have to, when you think about ability grouping these kids, you got to put them so that take the one who doesn't, who isn't necessarily a writer, but, can illustrate, or take the one who can't necessarily illustrate, but is the writer. You have to know who they are, and you have to put them, and in addition, so I'll also say this, in addition to putting them so that their individual personalities have the opportunity to come out, thank you. You also have to create opportunities in your instruction so that they can demonstrate what they're able to do. It's not just putting them in a place socially. So if we go back, kind of tie it all together, not just the BICS, that intercommunicative piece. But if we create centers and things where they can demonstrate what they can do academically, then that too, that's the other part. But the way that I always sort of talk about it with my students is that requires work on your part as a teacher, because you got to know who they are and you have to create the lessons so that they can do it. So I hope that answers the question. All right, so after feedback, did you have another one? Go ahead.
Universal screener. Do you use a universal screener for your kids to figure out what, I guess, that level of?
So beginner, intermediate,
Yes,
advanced. Okay,
yes.
so in Texas, we have what we call TELPAS. It's the Texas English Language Proficiency Assessment System. So these kids have to come in and they have to take, now it's online. They'll do an online test. And then they have to do a writing sample. And then we look at the writing sample, and then the writing sample. So the way to really sort of really basic and brief with you, when we look at, so they'll do their online sort of, to see where they are. And then we look at their writing samples. If you think about a beginner, so if you were going to categorize a beginning student, little to no ability, and that's across listening, speaking, reading, and writing. They have no ability, little to no ability. If you think about, so how are they intermediate? The word is gist. They get the gist of it. If it's highly practiced, recently, highly practiced, recently introduced, they can work with it. Simple, right? Simple sentences. But a lot of like second language acquisition support, both for beginners and then in the intermediates. If you think about, the advanced kids can do it. I think about an advanced kid, an advanced ELL or an advanced emergent bilingual as any kid, because they're all at that level, right? Advanced high kids are the ones that don't need you at all. They're fine. I think it's just by, they're in there, they're labeled or categorized. I shouldn't say labeled, but they're categorized as advanced high, but you wouldn't know it. They have complete, so in terms of like speaking and writing and reading, they are the way that they say that they are comparable or nearly comparable. In my experience, those that are advanced high are the best. They're almost like you're gifted because they're so conscientious about the language. They've spent so much time learning it that they're very, whereas a kid who hasn't had to be so intentional, they've sort of just been immersed in it and they've learned it. these kids have to intentionally apply it. So does that?
Yeah.
Okay. No, thank you for the question. Customizable learning is the next one. This tool allows flexibility in altering content and settings to meet individual linguistic needs. And that really speaks to beginners, intermediates, advanced, or advanced high in the state of Texas, including diagnostic capabilities, measurement of language level, and proficiency level movement. So I sat with, as we were working our way through this, and I sat with a computer tech from the university. Excuse me. And the only reason he and I met was because I taught his wife, and he was like, my wife like really liked you. I just want to come and meet you. Da, 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 da. And I was like, what do you, and we just struck up this conversation. And so I was talking to him about the rubric. He asked me, as a tech person, as somebody who builds computer programs, he's like, hey, can they move? Can they move out of beginning to advanced? Will the program allow them to, can they test out of it? Is there a proficiency level movement in that particular tool? And I was like, well, that's a really good question. He was like, if I was building the rubric, I would put it in there. So I put it in there, right? Because I thought it was really good. After customizable learning, we have engaging. And engaging, the user is self-directed and highly motivated to use the tool. And if you have classroom experience, any sort of classroom experience, if you ask a kid to do something, are they excited to do it? Or is it like, oh, man, right? Again, this thing, does it speak to it being like, is it something that the kids want to do because they see some benefit? They're actually able to sort of move their way through it. Or is it just something for them to fill time while they're sitting in the back of the room and not a part of the classroom experience, which we never want for our students. Does it allow the students to engage in the 6 language domain? So in Texas, we talk about listening, speaking, reading, and writing. But as we, Dr. Banker and I were working on the rubric, and as we were sort of redoing it, reworking it, do they get to do the viewing and the representing? Because that's important. And again, that speaks to the way that these young people see the world today. Everything is online, their whole experience. So I'll tell you a funny story, if you don't mind, just to kind of illustrate this. My son went out with a girl over the summer, and he was very excited. It's like, I'm going out with so-and-so. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. I was like, how did this happen? He's like, well, we text. It's like, okay, do you want to, we meeting somewhere? Do you want to like go bowling? Like, what do you want? No, we're okay. We just talk. We just said, but you're going out, right? That's so they're all sort of, that it lasted a few weeks, long distance relationships are difficult, right? They're just so hard. But it's funny because they don't know a world any differently. They just don't. And so we need to respect that, and we need to bring that into whatever it is that they're learning. And we need to bring that into our instruction as well. So this, and then these are the 6 language domains, just so that you can see them sort of spread across here. The listening, the speaking, the reading and writing, the viewing, and then the representing visually, representing to learn. And to kind of, if you're not so, just to kind of give you an idea of what it means to represent visually. Are any of you familiar with, or have you used Flipgrid? Okay, that's the representing visual part, right? So those kids who don't necessarily talk in the classroom, they're sort of introverted, especially if they don't have command of the social language nor the academic language. They don't understand the customs, they don't understand the cultures, they don't understand the customs and culture and climate in your classroom. But take a phone and put it in front of a kid and they'll go, right? So giving them the opportunity, one of the things that we learned to do, especially when so I like to do this with Flipgrid. I like to do it with Padlet. Padlet has all of these new things that have been built into it. is that I create a center where I ask them a question and their response, so they have to formulate, so they're heterogeneous groups, right, ability groups. And then they have to collectively respond to a prompt or a question based on something that they've read or something that they viewed. But I'm not asking them to write, they'll have to sort of comport themselves and compose what it is that they're trying to say. But they have to record a 90-second response. You have 90 seconds. And so they'll record a video, and the kid that never talks and the kid that never participates is actually now sort of doing this, right? And then as a teacher, I can listen to what they're saying. And I can give them feedback, I can help them, I can do, does all of that sort of make sense? Yeah, okay, all right, perfect. Here's the rubric, and I think all of you have a copy of the rubric, and this is the way that we built the rubric, and it's sort of just, as we've gone down, it's missing one of the following, it's sort of how one piece is missing from the exemplary, but this is it in its full, I don't know, splendor. And it's splendor. And so what we would like to give you an opportunity to do, sort of an interactive part, is you have the rubric with you. If you'd like, this is a digital copy. You can grab the QR code, just open up the camera on your phone. I think everybody knows how to do that, and you can pull, right? And then it will allow you to do a little scoring. It's an so you can, everything's set up on our point system. So I'll give you an opportunity to do that.
Works online, you don't have to figure out if it's scored.
Are we good? We're cool. All right. These are the references that we use. I'll just let those go. Now, here is a QR code to a Language Tools website. So if you scan this one, this is going to take you to a Yale, it's Yale, but it'll take you to a website that's got all of these sort of language tools that you can take a look at. And if you wanted to practice a little bit with the rubric, we're going to give you a couple of suggestions of where you can go look, we'll give you a couple of good ones that you can go look at that the rubric would sort of align itself with. And we're going to give you a couple that, like, I understand why you have a rubric tool, right? Are you there? Is it okay? All right, so these are the ones, we'll give you a few minutes. So take a look at Dave's ESL Cafe. One of the links, you can take a look at Dave's ESL Cafe. Take a look at ESL Goals, take a look at Many Things Spelling, and then take a look at the ESL Cyber Listening Lab. And that way you can just kind of get a glimpse, kind of go in there and then look at the rubric, look at those, and just see what you think. And we have until 9, we have what, 10 minutes, about 10 minutes? Okay, so why don't we give you like 3 or 4 minutes, how's that? We'll do like 3 or 4 minutes real quick, just so that you can take a look at it. I want you just to have an opportunity to look at the website, look at the rubric real quick. And then I want to absolutely give you time to ask a few questions if you have any questions about what we're doing, both in person and online.
And while we're looking, I just want to say, how does the language begin? As IDs, those of you who are IDs in the room, we always want to put cutesy things in there to grab their attention. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Let me do this again. As IDs, those of you in the audience and some instructors who go ahead and do their own creating in an online world, we like to pick cutesy things so that they'll be engaged. Are they necessarily pedagogically correct? And looking at emergent bilingual learners, we need to keep that in mind.
And so first of all, I apologize for actually 12 minutes. So
Okay.
So no, this is incredibly exciting. I love the idea of this rubric. So I am a director of e-learning, and so I oversee our instructional design unit. But I also am a faculty member who teaches emergent Spanish language learners. And when I came in and just hearing about this, the first thing that came to mind was General Standard 6, especially 6.1, as we're talking about alignment and just being very intentional about the selection of technology, to, as you were saying, making sure that we are meeting the objectives. We're not starting with the activities, but that we're first thinking about what is the point. And in doing so, this is incredibly helpful because for many, especially when we're thinking about alignment and the alignment of technology and the different tools that are being utilized, sometimes it's a little challenging to extract, the focus of the technology away from the activity or away from the assessment. So utilizing this rubric is a great way to really focus in on the purpose of the technology and to use that in the process of actually selecting it and deciding how to utilize it effectively to help learners meet those objectives of the course. So I think this is wonderful. Thank you.
No, thank you. I will tell you.
Thank you.
One of the things, so I was teaching for 10 years before I ever got down to the Rio Grande Valley of Texas. I've taught in 4 different districts in 2 different states. I have 20 years in public school classrooms. When I got to the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, I was completely rebuilt as a teacher. I knew how to teach, but I did not know how to teach these emergent bilinguals. I had no idea. And I was ready to, I had retail experience. I was very honestly looking at HEB and Walmart to go work back in retail because it was so difficult working with these kids. In my first year, as my wife was telling me, just make it to Thanksgiving, make it to Christmas, make it to spring break. And that first summer, we went through a training, Understanding by Design. It's the first time I've ever done Understanding by Design. And I always, like to give credit where credit's due, but Roger was the trainer's name. And Roger taught me how to target fatigue, taught me how to look at the skill, your SLO, to look at the SLO and what is the verb? What is the action word? What is it asking you to do? Is it asking you to diagram? Is it asking you to delineate, analyze? And so what you're saying, that this rubric, that mentality, that's where this is from. It's from that mentality in the sense that before I start using this tool, is it doing what I need it to do? Because if it's not going to help the kid, and I'll go one step further, I am that kid. I was that kid. I didn't know what a pot and a pan and a griddle or an iron was, but if you'd asked me what an olla, a sartén, or comal, I could have helped you. But I didn't know it as a 4th grader. And it's had an incredibly impactful, it's had incredible impact on my teaching career. I don't want kids to feel the way that I felt. My story is long, but by the grace of God that I'm here. That's it. And I don't want kids to feel the way that I felt in the classroom as a 4th grader, where I felt like I didn't understand education and education didn't understand me. So when I think about this, and I think about this rubric, and I think about Dr. Shalui telling me you should turn this into something, and then sitting with Dr. Banker and going, how do we make this better? It's always about what's best for the kid. How can I help that child not feel the way that I felt, but also how can I help them feel successful? Because they have every right to feel successful, just as anybody does, whether they are native speakers or not. They have a right to the curriculum. Do you have
Were you able to look at any of these tools?
like take a look at a couple of them really quickly, just sort of see what you think. At least you can take a look. Dave's ESL Cafe is a really good one, I'll be honest with you. It's a classic. And it's well maintained. It is. It's really good. I think if you go to the ESL Cyber Listening Lab, not so much. Not so much. That one's not so good. It's there, but it doesn't really offer you. And so if I look at, like, just to kind of give you an idea, if I look at the ESL cyber listening lab, it doesn't necessarily align with, so I looked at what they were doing for beginners and what they were doing for what their beginners are called, and I don't know that my beginning students, with my experience, I don't know that my beginning students would even understand what they were saying or be able to replicate, or because it wants you to go back and sort of speak, but I don't know that it's ability level, which is why when we created the rubric, and we sort of built this around, looking at the WIDA standards as well. I think that's something else that we should talk about really quickly. And I thought I had them in here. Didn't I have them in here?
You had a reference to.
So just this one. I don't know what happened to it. The world-class instructional design. So the WIDA standards, what Dr. Banker and I, so when we were thinking about the rubric and then we were thinking about coming to Q1, like we're gonna, apply and come here, Dr. Banker's suggestion was we need to make this broader. Okay. We need to make this broader and we need to make it applicable outside of Texas. And so we went to the WIDA standards and and one of the things that I really like about the WIDA standards is that it takes, so the WIDA standards will, because when you work with students, they don't always nicely fit. They're not really a beginner, they're maybe a high beginner, maybe a low intermediate, or a high intermediate going. The WIDA standards allow us, and so when we built the manuscript, we included this as our framework, but we go into the descriptors more than we can. These descriptors are built into the rubric, but in the manuscript, we describe the ability for us to more concretely place students where they need to be. We get a couple of extra spots where we can put kids who aren't, necessarily beginners. Maybe they have the BICS, the basic intercommunicator, but they're missing the calc. So they're not necessarily beginners, but maybe they're high beginners, low intermediates. And the WIDA standards allow us to do that. They allow us to sort of place kids in more concrete areas where we can target the instruction for them more specifically so that we can make sure that they are getting equal access to the curriculum and equal access to the skills. So I know I've only got a couple minutes left.
Any other questions?
I want to open it up to questions or anything that I can help you sort of clarify for you before our time ends.
There's one online if you.
Okay, absolutely.
If available, what is the accredited, verifiable, and contactable source for the rubric? Is it collecting student data in the process? And if so, how might that data be used?
Okay, so that's our next step, is we are pushing, that's our next step, is that we have a partnership. I have a very close relationship with a district in the DFW area with the superintendent, where the student population is very indicative of the kind of students that this would work for. And that's from a research perspective, that's our next step. Dr. Banker and I have talked, more Dr. Banker than me, because she's like, we need to get this into a school district and we need to see what the data says about teachers actually using it. This particular rubric is research-based. It's based on those best practices. And I will show you online. So some of these references, this is where the basis of this rubric comes. In particular, I need to give credit where credit is due to Dr. Shalui, who was my professor at Sam Houston State University, and he required this assignment of me. And so he actually wrote the textbook that we were using, computer assisted language learning, STEM, and he brought in STEM, but that's where you would find the basis for. So we didn't just make it up. It is research based. It comes from, some ideas. We tweaked it, we made it our own. We brought in the WIDA standards, the ELPS and the WIDA standards, sort of amalgamated those and came up with what we think is the best possible framework right now until we can get it into, excuse me, until we can get it into the classroom and get it into the hands of teachers and see what they're doing with it and then get some feedback. But that is certainly our next step. Any other questions that we could answer? I got probably 90 seconds. No? All right, so what I will leave you with tonight, or this morning, I need breakfast and coffee. This is our contact information, both Dr. Banker and myself. We welcome if you have any thoughts or if there's anything that you think this might be applicable to. Dr. Banker and I have absolutely no ego when it comes to seeking guidance or getting some feedback or some ideas for applicability. Our mentality is very much collegial. So if there's anything that we can do to help you or you can do to help us, we absolutely will. And I truly, just for me, I'll let Dr. Banker say, but thank you so much for spending your time with us this morning and listening to our little idea that we have here for online learning.
Hope you enjoy the rest of your company.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Appreciate you spending some time with us.